Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Shepheard Walwyn Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Brown. Today we welcome back our most successful and our popular author, Fred Harrison, author of Cheating. Now, the book Cheating has just sold out in hardback, and we're just about to launch the paperback and ebook versions. So we thought, what a great chance to get Fred back on the podcast, talk about what's happened since the launch of Cheating just a few months ago, and see what more work there is to be done. Fred, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, Jonathan. Good to be with you.
So, Fred, when I interviewed you, and something that went down, it was quite a challenge for audience members who challenged you on this, was that you felt that you were essentially an expert in failure in terms of getting your ideas across and influencing people. And yet we've just had the hardback sell out. We're just about to launch the ebook and the paperback. You had the red carpet treatment at the Turin Film Festival. I just wondered, how has it been since the launch of the hardback?
Well, the situation is complicated. It's true that I tend to underplay my contribution over these last few decades. But on the other hand, we have seen some very concrete advances in the public domain. Not just the current UK Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, talking about the virtue of a land value tax, but other commentators in the media are now beginning to give time and space to the concept of the need to reform the property taxes. The problem is, Jonathan, that the academic world remains silent, not so much on the idea of a fiscal reform that includes the land value tax, as it's conventionally referred to. They do not want to be seen to be referring to those people like myself who are experts in the field of fiscal reform. It's as if they want to protect their reputation and that they feel it would be damaged in some way if they did give time and space to those who are associated with the American philosopher Henry George. So when we see books being published on the land question, if you look in the bibliography, there's no reference to William Vickrey, for instance, a distinguished late economist who was a Nobel Prize winner and a powerful advocate of the need to shift revenue off earned income onto rents. And there's no reference to people like Mason Gaffney, who was a distinguished economist in California, or to Nicholas Tiedemann, who wrote a significant article about how the fiscal reform would actually increase wealth. It wasn't just a neutral fiscal reform, but it would amplify the productivity in the economy. So it's the academic community that is holding things back by failing to nail the reforms that are so essential. Perhaps I can give an illustration by explaining that my book that's just come out, Cheating, it's actually a toolkit which the academics could use to develop their attempts at finding solutions to today's world problems. An example of the failure is a guy called Daron Acemoglu. He's a Nobel Prize winning economist who's just published a book called What Happened to Liberal Democracy. He tries to reconstruct what is necessary to rebuild in America the concept of liberal democracy. But his 5 measures that he says are required, they would all fail to deliver the results he wants just because he does not have a grasp of the underlying reality that drives our economies. There is not a single reference to the idea of a fiscal reform to support the idea of rebuilding society in favor of an inclusive, wealth creating social system that doesn't damage the environment. So my book is, yes, making headway, and I'm pleased that the hardback sold out, but we have to somehow penetrate the academic world to explain that they need this toolkit that I provide, which is a further elaboration of what used to be called land value taxation, which is a phrase I no longer ever use because it's defective. We need new language, new narratives. Acemoglu says we need a new narrative, but he falls back on the old version because he cannot conceive of how to develop the philosophy of economic prosperity and growth. So Shepheard Walwyn still has this huge challenge of making the breakthrough in the academic world. But in the political world, there undoubtedly now is a shift in interest in favor of fiscal reform. And I think you've referred to some of the examples around the world. Perhaps you could
Well, yeah, on one level, it's very exciting. So, as you said, in the UK, Andy Burnham, there's also people talking in Australia, New Zealand. There's a New Zealand party that's been talking about a fairer way to tax, and part of that being land value taxation. There is a variation if you look charitably at the Mayor of New York's approach to taxing the second property, or the pied-à-terre tax, as it's been popularly described, which has become highly controversial because it's been perceived as being anti-wealth creator, anti-enterprise. When again, if someone looked at the actual research that you've done and others have done, it's actually the opposite. It's the one that would allow for enterprise and allow for more entrepreneurialism. Exactly what you said, really. It's not just that people need to read your work. I know you don't care about that in and of itself. It's that if we're going to introduce these things, there's got to be the theoretical understanding of how to do it properly, because otherwise it'll just be one more tax rather than a tax that can actually reduce overall tax burden, but also increase the kind of behaviour that I know we spoke a lot about in Taken for a Ride with Don Riley's rewrite and the publication of the second edition of that, in that people get rewarded for the contribution they make, which is the essence of any kind of fair society, but also they pay for the benefits that they receive. Which again, unfortunately, people increasingly seeing that as not being the case in their communities. And so there's introduced, I know you did a fabulous episode of your podcast on looking at Gary Stevenson's wealth tax documentary, pointing out what was good about it, but also where it was going to fail. How we can get people to see that we need to have a deeper conversation, but that conversation will release and lead to a much better society that rewarded hard work and all the things that politicians say they want. We can get more of this. It's just that we can't get it on the foundations we've got. I used to run a construction company, and one of the most annoying and unrewarding things you could do was having to repair the foundations of a house, and talking to any homeowner about that. They'd want it to be the cheapest possible version because they saw no benefit to it. Literally, if the house is falling down because the foundations are shot, and you've got to either, in America you can lift up the house because they're mostly made of wood and redo the whole base. In the UK, a lot of it involves pumping cement and concrete into the base of the house to strengthen it again. But they don't want to do it because there's no reward, in inverted commas, for doing all that great work, except that your house stays up. And it's one of those things that we need to get back into. Well, let's look at the foundations for how do you create, what is a fair reward for someone's effort? And they seem philosophical, But when you look at your work over the last 40, 50 years, they're absolutely pivotal to creating a better answer to the questions and the problems that we're facing.
Exactly. And you're quite right that the narrative at the present time is too confined, and the language used by politicians seeking to get elected contributes to the narrowing of the debate. For instance, the use of the concept of a wealth tax is useless, because a wealth tax not only has a history of being failed, but it's an attempt to penalize people who create wealth as well as people who just collect other people's wealth. There's no discrimination between the two. And that's what we need, a nuanced understanding of what is involved. And to follow up on your analogy of rebuilding the foundations, people are humane and they really do want a decent world, but they're not allowed to connect the dots. They're not allowed to see how the ripple effects of the current system, where they collect capital gains, is linked to premature deaths of innocent citizens and so many other disasters happening in the community, including failing to fund those services which the homeowner says he and she wants. All these elements are not connected in a system that I call audit and accountability. What we actually need, Jonathan, is a new approach to the way governments audit their financial system, not just the revenue coming in, but a full audit of the way that the revenue is spent, not just on the first level spending on a highway or some new public service, but a discussion about the ripple effects, the consequences of the way the government spends money, because that would lead to horrific stories. Some of the expenditures lead to the premature deaths of people. Why are we using taxes that lead to the death of innocent citizens in our democracies? It doesn't make sense. It's an outrage. But there's no discussion about it in the pub or people walking their dogs in the park, because the dots are not connected for them. And that's what we need, an accountability system that raises general awareness of the real damage that's being done by the present way of collecting revenue.
Amazing. And I know you and Peter Smith, you run the podcast, your own podcast channel, Geophilos, or the Fred Harrison podcast. What are the ideas that are resonating most with your subscribers and with readers as you engage with them?
Well, we're at a unique phase, not just in our lifetimes, but actually in world history, because this is a tipping point. In the book, I explained that there are now 5 existential threats to humanity. The 4 that originated with property rights that began 5,000 years in antiquity, and the new one that's just come alive in the last 30, 40 years, which is the digital threat. People now realize that there is something fundamentally wrong in our social system. They can see whole communities being burnt down. They know that fires are no longer confined to remote countryside areas. Ocean levels are rising and wiping out coastal communities. So they're looking for an explanation, and the one that I'm offering that traces the origins of these events is obviously proving, well, seminal in actual fact, because nobody else is actually explaining how these various threats to humanity, which includes the death-dealing mutual destruction of people like Putin, the flooding in of migrants en masse from the global south, nobody's explained that these all can be tracked back to an original cause. And so that's a pivotal aspect of the book Cheating. And people obviously they need time to come to grips with the theory and the historical evidence that makes sense of this bewildering world. And that's what I believe I've offered. It's a challenge because on the one hand, people want to know, but as soon as you raise the prospect of fiscal reform, particularly the one that has a personal impact on one's personal property, the capital gains accruing to one's home, a psychological barrier is thrown up. And the challenge for us now is to overcome that barrier. And we do that by creating a new way of auditing what is happening in our world and holding the system accountable, because it's an intolerable system that we have. If we connect the dots, we realize that the things like premature deaths of our fellow citizens originates closer to home than we care to admit. And if the facts are demonstrated beyond doubt, then people are more likely to start campaigning for the fundamental changes that are needed. So at the present, the debate, the diagnosis, even by people like Andy Burnham, is at the superficial level. They think that by devolving power to the regions, that somehow that will start to solve our problems, but it won't. And the example of that in the UK case is that power was devolved to Scotland 30 years ago, but they still haven't adopted the policy that would begin to reverse the problems in Scotland, which have now got worse under the devolution. So the Burnham model of having a number 10 Downing Street in Manchester is just gesture politics. And it has to be explained to him why that is so. And that's where the literature that's been compiled by Shepheard Walwyn over the decades becomes fundamental. And the challenge is to open that literature up to the academic community so that they begin to factor these issues into their modeling of how the world might work better in the future.
Do you know, Fred, I was just thinking, I know we've both done lots of reading and work in areas around trauma and healing and recovery and those kind of things. Myself, more personal than professional. But it really sounds to me that there's no future without accepting that they're an addict to an utterly failed philosophy, which is going to be traumatic and it's very difficult. But then also there's reassurance and hope and peace that come from knowing that you can now build on a solid foundation and that you can embrace a more truthful and a more sustainable approach to living. Now, before we wrap up, Fred, one of the things that would be utterly wrong of me to do would be for us not to talk about your 2026 peak prediction for this economic cycle. My hope would be that governments around the world would embrace different philosophies and policies before the crash. But I think we're both of the opinion that that's not going to happen. So it's going to be during and after the crash that we can have this conversation, the way that you have to sometimes wait for an addict to hit bottom before you can engage with them. But what are you seeing around the 26 being the peak as per your prediction from many years ago, and the strands of the coming crash and the economic chaos that could come from this next collapse?
Yes. Well, the story goes back to the last one, 2008 to 2010. Offering 10-year warnings did not work back then because the mindset of the politicians and their expert advisors was closed to the possibility of actually being able to prevent something like what happened in 2008. Well, we're in a situation where, again, the long-range forecast of 2026 has not been adhered to, and we are seeing the world coming apart. But this time, people, even though they don't have the theory of why that is so in their minds, are able to observe the detail of what is happening with very specifically the example of Donald Trump and his contribution of land grabbing and rent cashing in on for his family. They've got that firmly in their mind. So once the worst of what is now about to happen, with the collision of all these existential threats coming to a head in one time, if we can now explain to people the underlying theory, the foundations of what caused this huge existential crash, one hopes that we can replace fear and anxiety, the kind of thing that drives people to support the right-wing autocrats, replace that with the hope that actually we can rebuild society so that everybody is inclusively enriched, not just materially, but psychologically and spiritually, in a world that's much better than the one we've left behind.
Brilliant. Well, positive note to finish. Fred, just for those who don't know, where's the best place to find more of your work and to connect with you?
Well, go on to the Shepheard Walwyn website. It lists all the books that are available.
And but also that we've got the Fred Harrison YouTube channel and Shepheard Walwyn channel as well, right? So we can direct people to that. So as always, Fred, very excited to be part of this journey and helping people to find better answers to the questions that they've got. And thanks as always for your time.
Thank you, Jonathan. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to the Shepheard Walwyn podcast. To explore these ideas further, be sure to visit our website www.shepherdwalwyn.com and join our mailing list for news and special offers. Check out our authors and buy the books to learn more. And you can also find us on social media. Links are also on the website. And if you like the podcast, please head over to iTunes or Spotify to give us a review. It's surprisingly helpful in getting the ideas out there. So until next time, keep reading